So today we are going to be touring the Historical Archaeology Lab.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Barbara Heath. I'm a historical archaeologist in the department, and this is the Faulkner Historical Archaeology Lab. It's named after Charlie Faulkner, who was one of the first archaeologists in the department and was the first person to do historical archaeology. So you're in our main processing room. We have an active field project going on, and as we bring artifacts back and environmental samples back, we process them here, and by processing we basically mean washing them in the sink with a toothbrush, putting them on the drying racks, which are over that way, to dry, and then sorting them by material type and bagging them up and putting them away so they wait for being cataloged. So we have two folks here who are, actually three folks, my teaching assistant, Hannah Maines, and then two folks who are working in the lab with us this semester doing a whole bunch of different things. And right now they're sorting through flotation samples, separating out little artifacts from botanical remains that we'll have analyzed by Dr. Hollenbach and some of her students, and also like little animal bones, which Dr. Jensen and some of her students might be working on, and then little stones that don't mean anything, so we want to get those separated out too. So they're working on that. We have a type collection here, which is basically learning collection. So if we find a piece of ceramics or glass and we want to compare it to something and we're not quite sure what it is, we have comparative samples from the site that we're working on now that we can sort of use to figure out what we have found in the ground. And we also use this, I teach a historical archaeology lab class that is really focused on identifying historic artifacts. So we use the collections here, and there's a big set of collections out the hallway as well that we use for class. And then back here we have more lab space. We do some washing here. Our main computer is here. We catalog all our artifacts and have a database there, and our GIS, which is a program that has all the spatial data from the site, is on the computer in here. And then back this way a little bit further is our storage area. And these are collections from the sites that we're currently working on, a couple of old collections that have been in the department for a while that we may work on in the future, and then supplies and equipment that we use in the field and in the lab. Most of the boxes that are in this room are here on temporary loan while we're excavating our site, and they'll eventually be transported back to Virginia where our field site is and stored there for long-term storage. So I wanted to just say a couple of words about the project that we're doing. Get it this way. We're working at a site called Cone Hall, and it's an adjacent site called Boathouse Pond. They're located in northern Virginia on what's called the Northern Neck, just south of the Potomac River. And if you look across the river, you can see St. Mary City, Maryland. And that was the first place in Maryland that the English settled in the 1630s. And our site both predates that by several thousand years and also is contemporary. Some of the settlement there is contemporary with St. Mary City, and some of it's a little bit later. So we started out looking for a house that was built in the early 1640s by an English settler and his family, and we've been working on that site for several years. And more recently, we've also started looking at a site that's adjacent to that, where the indigenous folks that were living on the land before the English arrived had a village that had been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that village site, unfortunately, is eroding away because of climate change and because of some natural forces anyway. So we've been doing some salvage excavations out there, and we found stuff that dates from about 2,000 years ago to about 1500 AD. And mostly what we're finding are pieces of stone tools. This is a kind of cool quartz tool, and called the biface because both sides were used. We have lots of evidence of like tool making. So somebody was taking a large stone and flaking it off to make tools out of it, and this is what was left over. These are mostly materials that were from Virginia, but not specifically from the site. And then we also have a lot of pottery, which is probably dates from about 900 to 1000 AD up to about 14 or 1500 AD. So it's pretty small. It's been in the ground for a while and trampled on, but we can identify it. So it's interesting to understand when people started making pottery and how different traditions of pottery making happened. And then over here, we have some stuff that dates from the 17th century English occupation up to the early 18th century. So most of the material here is imported from Europe. A lot of English ceramics, coarsewares that were used for like processing dairy products, tablewares that you'd serve your dinner on. A lot of tobacco pipes. So these are broken up fragments of smoking pipes made out of English white clay. And then we do have a few Native American ceramics mixed in with those, which is kind of cool, and some also some lithics. So these are the byproducts of stoneworking, but the materials are very different. By the early historic period, we're getting mostly imported European flint, and indigenous people are making tools and doing things with that, which is really interesting to see the change in materials. And then back at Boathouse Pond, we have our really early site, and then we have an early 20th century site sitting on top of that. So the folks that lived at this site were probably tenant farmers. They may have been the descendants of people who were enslaved on the property, and after emancipation they stayed and worked for the family that owned the land, or they may have been people that were hired specifically after the Civil War, and their family stayed on the property into the early 20th century. So we have a lot of broken pieces of ceramics again, and there's a little, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little piece of a shoe in that one. We have architectural materials, so nails that were part of a building, lots of pieces of carbonized wood and burned bones that we can hopefully identify some of the things the people that were there were eating, a lot of bottle glass, some really interesting pharmaceutical glass. One of them is a bottle that was used to treat diphtheria, so we have a little insight into some of the health conditions at the site in the early 20th century. So students who are working in the lab are also learning to identify these artifacts and learning how to catalog and analyze these artifacts as well. Finally, my last plug of the day is we have a field school out at the site every year, and we'll be out this summer in June, and I'm putting up posters soon, so if anybody's interested in joining us for field work, they can either get in touch with me or they can see the information on the poster and eventually get in touch with me that way. So thank you.
All right, thank you.